Imagine stepping into a hotel elevator late at night. The doors refuse to close. The air suddenly turns freezing, smelling like wet earth and rust. The floor numbers start spinning backward. The lights go out. And just before you turn around, something cold and wet touches your neck. The Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles does not welcome guests. It tolerates them. By 2013, its walls were already saturated with the residue of 100 tragedies. Serial killers like Richard Ramirez had paced its halls, and countless souls had checked in, only to check out through the windows. When Elisa Lam, a spirited but fragile student from Vancouver, stepped into the lobby, she saw a vintage relic of old Hollywood. She didn't see the Death Hotel. She was on a West Coast tour, a journey of self-discovery documented in her Tumblr posts. In the beginning, the prose was light. She spoke of the California sun and the majestic, albeit decaying, architecture of the Cecil. But as she moved from the vibrant streets into the dim, yellow-lit corridors of the hotel, the tone shifted. The hotel began to build a cage around her. She complained of the creepy vibe and the strange people in the elevators. The building was a labyrinth of 700 rooms, many of which were occupied by long-term residents who lived in the shadows. For Elisa, the setup was a trap disguised as a vacation. The heavy velvet curtains and the flickering fluorescent lights weren't just aesthetic. They were the first signs of a looming psychological claustrophobia.
Elisa's goal was simple: to find herself. She wanted to prove she can navigate the world independently despite her struggles with mental health. She wanted to capture the perfect travel experience. But as the days passed, her goal shifted from exploration to survival. She felt watched. The hotel's history seemed to press against her skin. Her goal became a desperate attempt to find a safe space within a structure that offered none. She sought connection, but the hotel offered only isolation. She reached out to her family daily, a tether to reality. Her goal was to make it to Santa Cruz, her next stop. She just had to survive a few more nights in the Cecil. But the hotel was hungry. It didn't want her to leave. It wanted to archive her. Her movements became erratic as she tried to solve the mystery of the heavy air on the hallways, searching for an exit that wasn't a door, but a release from the encroaching darkness. The conflict reached its peak on the night of January 31st, 2013. The infamous elevator footage is the only testament to this struggle. In the video, Elisa isn't alone, not in her mind. She steps into the elevator, but it doesn't move. She presses multiple buttons, her fingers dancing in a panicked rhythm. The conflict is visible in her body language. She peers out into the hallway, jumping back as if dodging a physical blow. She hides in the corner, pressing herself against the cold metal, her hands contorting in unnatural ways. Is she fighting a ghost, a hallucination, or a physical predator lurking just out of the camera's view? The conflict was internal and external, a war between a girl who wanted to live and a set of circumstances that were pulling her toward the roof. The ultimate conflict occurred in the darkness of the rooftop. Despite the alarmed doors and the sheer height of the water tanks, she found herself standing before them. The heavy lids, the freezing water, and the pitch-black sky. Something, or some inner drive, compelled her to climb the ladder and plunge into the black water of the cistern.
The result was a slow, agonizing silence. For 2 weeks, Elisa was missing. Meanwhile, the guests at the Cecil began to notice something horrific. The water in the faucets had turned a sickly, translucent black. It came out in a weak, sputtering stream. When they brushed their teeth, the water tasted sweet and metallic. When they showered, the water felt oily on their skin. On February 19th, a maintenance worker climbed to the roof to check the tanks. He opened the lid and found Elisa. She was floating face up, her skin pale and bloated by the very water the guests had been drinking and bathing in for 19 days. The result was a global trauma. The mystery of how the lid was closed from the outside and how she got past the alarms remained unsolved. The girl who wanted to be seen by the world had ended up in the one place where no one could see her, becoming a literal part of the hotel's plumbing. The Cecil Hotel changed forever that day, but so did everyone who followed the story. It wasn't just a murder mystery. It was a realization that the places we inhabit can absorb our tragedies. The hotel was eventually rebranded, but the stain remained. The change was psychological, a collective shiver whenever someone enters an elevator that doesn't close its doors immediately. Elisa Lam became a digital ghost. Her tragedy proved that in the age of constant surveillance, the most terrifying things still happen in the blind spots. The change is felt in the silence of the Cecil's hallways, where the air still feels heavy, and the water, no matter how many times the pipes are cleaned, still carries the phantom taste of a life lost in the dark. We no longer look at hotels as temporary homes. We see them as containers of the secrets left behind by those who never checked out. In the cold January of 1935, a man named Roland T. Owen checked into the hotel president in Kansas City, and right from the moment he signed the register with a hand that trembled slightly, the atmosphere in the lobby seemed to shift into something thick and suffocating. He arrived with no luggage, only a small comb and brush, and he specifically requested an interior room on an upper floor where the city noise couldn't reach him. And once he was settled in room 1046, he did something that chilled the staff to their core. He pulled the heavy velvet curtains shut, turned off every single light, and sat in the absolute crushing darkness, staring at the door as if waiting for a monster or a miracle to walk through it. Mary Soptic, a maid, entered the next day to find him sitting there like a statue in the shadows, his eyes wide and fixed on the nothingness of the room, and even as she cleaned around him, he remained silent, only murmuring that he was expecting a friend named Don, a name that felt like a heavy secret hanging in the air between them, while the hotel's walls seemed to pulse with a quiet, rhythmic dread. Roland's goal was a mystery wrapped in a lie, for his very name was a fabrication, and his presence in that room was not for rest, but for a dark appointment that he seemed both to crave and to fear with every fiber of his being. And as the hours turned into days, his goal became an agonizing wait for this Don to arrive and settle whatever debt or sin lay between them. He refused to let the light in, he refused to eat, and he refused to leave the confines of room 1046, acting as if the world outside the door had ceased to exist, or as if the door itself was the only thing keeping his reality from shattering into 1,000 pieces. And his singular focus was so intense that it felt like he was trying to summon something from the shadows rather than wait for a human visitor. A goal that was slowly transforming the hotel room into a ritualistic chamber where time and logic were starting to bleed out into the carpeted hallways. The conflict erupted not with a bang, but with a series of muffled, terrifying inconsistencies that Mary Soptic encountered every time she knocked. For one afternoon, she heard a deep, gravelly voice from inside the room telling her to go away and that Don was coming. But when the door finally opened later, Roland was alone, and the room was filled with a tension so sharp it felt like it could cut skin. And then the phone lines began to scream with confusion because the operator noticed the receiver in 1046 was off the hook for hours on end. The real conflict turned physical in the dead of night when sounds of a struggle, low moans, and the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor were heard by guests in nearby rooms. Yet no one called for help because the hotel president was a place where people minded their own business. And when a bellboy finally forced his way in, he found a scene of pure, unadulterated carnage. Roland was on his knees, his head in his hands, blood coating the walls of the bed and the ceiling, with multiple stab wounds and a wire cinched so tight around his neck that it had disappeared into his flesh. Yet even as he lay dying in a cool of his own life, he fought to keep the secret, gasping to the police that he had simply fallen against the bathtub, protecting his killer with a loyalty that transcended the agony of his final breaths. The result was a vacuum of truth that the police could never fill, because as Roland took his last breath in the hospital, they realized that Don had vanished like smoke in a drafty hallway, and that Roland T. Owen didn't even exist, leaving behind a room that felt permanently stained by a violence that had no face and no motive. And the investigation only deepened the horror when they found that someone had paid for his funeral anonymously, sending flowers with a card that simply said, "Love forever, Louise." The room was scrubbed, the blood was washed away, and the furniture was replaced. But the result was a lingering haunting that wasn't about ghosts, but about the terrifying realization that a man could be tortured for hours in a crowded hotel and choose to die in silence rather than reveal the truth, leaving room 1046 as a monument to the things we take to our graves and the monsters we invite in to sit with us in the dark. The change was a permanent scar on the psyche of the city, for the mystery of room 1046 stripped away the illusion of safety that a locked hotel door provides and replaced it with the chilling thought that the person in the room next to you might be experiencing a living hell while you sleep peacefully just inches away. And it changed the way we perceive anonymity in these transient spaces where everyone is a stranger and every shadow could be a dawn waiting in the corner. Even decades later, the story serves as a grim reminder that some doors should never be opened and some guests never truly leave, as the air in that part of the hotel is said to remain heavy and cold, a permanent shift in the atmosphere that suggests the struggle between Roland and his unseen executioner is still playing out in a loop hidden just behind the veil of the present, waiting for the next guest to turn out the lights and sit in the dark. Perched high in the jagged peaks of the Colorado Rockies, the Stanley Hotel stands like a grand ivory monument to a forgotten era of elegance. But beneath its pristine white facade and red-tiled roof, there lies a subterranean energy that seems to vibrate through the very floorboards and into the bones of anyone who dares to stay in its expansive, echoing halls. In the early 20th century, the hotel was a sanctuary for the elite. But after a series of strange occurrences and a near-fatal explosion in 1911, the atmosphere changed from one of luxury to one of heavy, lingering watchfulness. And by the time Stephen King arrived in the 1970s, finding himself the only guest as the hotel prepared to close for the winter, the building had already begun to manifest its own consciousness, with endless corridors that seemed to stretch longer in the moonlight and empty ballrooms that resonated with the faint, ghostly music of a party that had ended decades ago, creating a setup where every guest felt less like a customer and more like a specimen being observed by the walls themselves. The goal of the Stanley has never been merely to provide a bed for the night, but rather to act as a bridge between the living and the memories that refuse to fade. And for the spirits that are said to dwell there, like the former head housekeeper Mrs. Wilson or the spectral children of the fourth floor, the goal is a perpetual repetition of their past lives, an endless cycle of service and play that ignores the passage of time and the presence of the living. Guests often arrive with the goal of debunking the legends or seeking a thrill, but they soon find their objectives shifting as the hotel begins to play with their senses, turning a simple walk to the lobby into a gauntlet of cold spots and phantom whispers, until their only goal becomes a desperate need to find a logical explanation for the laughter of children echoing in a wing of the building that has been vacant for months, or for the way their luggage is neatly unpacked by unseen hands while they are out for dinner. The conflict in the Stanley is a subtle psychological war between the physical world and the persistent echoes of the past, reaching a fever pitch in the infamous room 217, where the air feels like a physical weight against your chest and the temperature drops so sharply it feels like a blade against the skin. The conflict manifests in the small, terrifying details, the sound of a ball bouncing down the hallway only to find no child there, the heavy furniture in the lobby being rearranged in the middle of the night by invisible porters, and the chilling sensation of a cold hand brushing against yours as you reach for a light switch. But the most profound struggle is within the guests themselves as they try to maintain their sanity while witnessing the impossible, like the reflection of a woman in a period dress standing behind them in the vanity mirror, only to find the room empty when they turn around. A conflict that pits the safety of modern reality against an ancient, hungry haunting that wants to pull you into its timeless embrace. The result of these encounters is rarely a physical injury, but a total shattering of the soul's composure. For no one leaves the Stanley the same person they were when they checked in, as the hotel leaves a psychic residue on everyone who breathes its thin mountain air. The results are recorded in thousands of testimonials, stories of guests waking up to find their blankets tucked tightly around them by the ghost of Mrs. Wilson, or the terrifying accounts of the piano in the music room playing complex, melancholic concertos while the lid is closed and the room is locked, leaving a trail of questions that no scientist or investigator has ever been able to answer, and turning the hotel into a living museum of the macabre, where the result of every stay is a haunting realization that some places belong to the dead, and we are merely uninvited ghosts in their world. The change brought about by the Stanley Hotel is a global shift in how we perceive haunted architecture, transforming it from a local legend into a cultural phenomenon that defines our modern understanding of The Shining, that terrifying ability to see the world behind the veil. And it has changed the hotel itself from a dying relic into a thriving, pulsing center for the supernatural. The change is most evident in the way the staff and the guests now coexist with the entities, no longer fearing the shadows, but respecting them as the true owners of the property, creating a permanent alteration in the fabric of the building, where the past and the present are no longer separate, but are woven together into a thick, suffocating tapestry that proves that even if you leave the Stanley never truly leaves you, as its cold, high-altitude whispers continue to echo in your dreams long after you've returned to the safety of your own home.